Hi there, I'm Kathleen Jasper, and today I'm talking PLCs, Professional Learning Communities. This will not only help you if you are a teacher, but if you are an aspiring assistant principal, this video is going to help you as well. Let's get started. So PLC stands for Professional Learning Community. And many of you are already working in your PLCs. Some of you who are aspiring teachers, you're not in a PLC yet, but if you start in a public school, you will be in a PLC rather quickly. Most schools, districts, and states are using PLCs or PLC type structures to help teachers work together and conduct action research. Now, also, PLC is a topic that is covered on many content area, subject area exams. So if you're working on your principles of learning and teaching or your elementary ed or other certification exams, you may see questions around PLCs or team meetings or professional development meetings, things like that. So you're going to want to apply what I'm talking about today to your exams as well. So remember, I always talk about those good words and good practices. Well, PLCs properly done are good practices and will definitely be on those good words lists. So be on the lookout for that on test day. So this video is going to be the first video of several videos I make about PLCs. I'm a big fan of professional learning communities. I not only participated in professional communities when I was a teacher, but I also helped run them in my school. And we had a lot of success with our professional learning communities at our school, and our teachers ended up really liking them, and we ended up increasing student achievement by working through the action research in our PLCs. So I'm really proud of the work that I did with those teachers, and I thought I would share some of that with you today. So again, if you're a teacher, this is going to help you. And also if you're an aspiring assistant principal, this will help you because there's some tips and tricks here on how to run your PLCs and how to help teachers get the most out of their PLCs. Now, let's define what a PLC is and what a PLC isn't so that we know what we're dealing with here. So a PLC should really be a group of teachers, usually by team. If you're in elementary, it'll probably be grade level or maybe content area. And if you're in middle and high school, if you're a middle high school teacher, it's going to be by, content area. So the science team or the math team or the English language arts team or whatever. And so it's really done so that teachers in the same content area work together and analyze practices, pedagogy, and data in order to make better instructional decisions and to be better instructors. This is a way of working with your team to, analyze data and make instructional decisions. So really these are action research pods, and you should think of yourself as a researcher when you're sitting with your colleagues in your PLC. Now, what PLCs are not are complaining sessions about the administration, complaining sessions about students, sessions where somebody hijacks the entire time to talk about, what's bothering them. That's really not the purpose of the PLC. Those are things that should be dealt with in another group meeting, possibly at a happy hour after school. But PLCs are for action research, and they typically are only about a half an hour long because they happen after school during contract hours. So once the bell rings and you have enough time to maybe go to the bathroom and get yourself a water, you have to be in your PLC. Now, sometimes PLCs meet once a month, some meet once a week, some meet once a quarter. It just depends on how your school does them. We met once a month at our PLC meetings, and I thought that that was a really good kind of way to meet. It gave teachers enough time to work, alone on what was discussed in the PLCs and then come back once a month and talk about what they found. And I'll talk about that in a second. But once a month, I thought was a really good sweet spot to meet for PLCs. But every school is different and every district is different. Now, just like when working with students, working with adults can be challenging, and they've written lots of books about it and all different ways you can do it. But I find that when you set the expectation for your PLC and you have it written down and everybody agrees on these expectations, the PLC will go more smoothly than if it's just kind of fly by the seat of your pants. Adults want certain expectations written down. They want explicit instructions just like students do. And so it's very important that PLCs are organized. So if if you're in charge of your PLC, you may already be doing a great job of organizing it already. If you're an assistant principal, maybe you're trying to figure out how to get teachers to work better together. All of this can be challenging, but good organization and clear expectations for a PLC is your friend in these situations. And so here's how you do that. First, you want to set some norms for the PLC. So this can be done initially when you first get the team together. The first PLC of the year can be, what are our norms going to be? Just like you do with students, what are our classroom expectations going to be? You would do the same thing for the PLCs. Now, we don't need to call them expectations. You can call them norms. Meeting norms are really important because, as you know, I'm sure you've been a part of many meetings that go off topic, end up way longer than they should be. And, it becomes kind of a complaining session rather than a session where you're actually doing some work. So when I was running the PLCs at my high school that I was the assistant principal, I made sure that we had some norms already written down, some suggestions, but I definitely allowed teachers to make their own norms because the English department has its own kind of culture and situations, and the math team, has their own culture and situations. And so really the norms can be set by the PLC members and then agreed upon, okay? So some sample norms can be something like this. We start on time. All right. Now that's really important for a lot of people because PLCs, like I said, are happening right after you are done with school and you have this little tiny window of contract time. The school cannot keep you, in most districts, cannot keep you over your contract time unless you've agreed upon it and there's some sort of compensation. So really PLCs are somewhere between 25 minutes and 30 minutes unless you're using them during a professional development day, and that's a different situation. But typically PLCs are these very short periods of time in which teachers meet. So we want to start on time. So maybe one of your norms, your very first norm is we start on time. A second norm you may want to consider for your professional learning community or any meeting is we use positive language. Now that'll keep the complainers at bay. Now listen, I know that it's hard not to complain, especially right now when you're teaching under the circumstances you're teaching under, and it feels really good to kind of talk about your principal or your assistant principal and get things out that are frustrating, but that takes up a lot of time. You wouldn't believe how much time that takes up. And so while other people are waiting to get to the agenda items, you're complaining about your assistant principal. It's just not a good look. So I would save that for the happy hour after the PLC meeting. The third norm you might want to focus on, just a suggestion, is we focus on action research and student achievement. That helps to corral the language as well. That helps to corral the meeting so that you're just focused on that. And I'll talk about action research in just a minute. And the final norm you might want to use in your PLC, again, this is just a suggestion, is we keep our shares or we keep our discussion to 2 minutes or less or 1 minute or less. And you can kind of have, like a little stopwatch. Somebody could be keeping time. I know that sounds kind of maybe aggressive, but it really helps to keep the meeting on track and it really helps it to be systematic. So if you're in a type A PLC where people are very concerned about time, that's a norm that will help you. Or you could just say, we keep our shares to 2 minutes or less, and then maybe just keep an eye on the clock when somebody is talking rather than set the timer. But you may want to set the timer. There are lots of meetings where there is a timekeeper. So it's up to you how your meeting is run. Remember, every department has its own culture, and you will want to gauge that when you're doing your PLC. Now, beyond that, you want to have an agenda. I believe that every meeting should have an agenda because what happens is if you don't have an agenda, then it's just kind of a free-for-all and then nothing gets done. So the leader of the PLC will probably type up an agenda or, you'll agree upon some items from the previous PLC to be moved to next week's PLC, and that'll drive the agenda. But either way, you want to make sure you have a set of items and time limits so that you're sure to cover what you need to cover and stay within the time frame of the PLC and the short amount of time you have after school. So let's hop on over to my computer. I'm going to show you just a sample agenda. It is very simple. Remember, you don't want to spend your time making the agenda, okay? This can just be a quick Word document. I made it like kind of nice here. It is printer friendly. I just have some blues and blacks here. But of course, you know how I love Canva. I've done a bunch of videos on using Canva. So I went into Canva and I just put agenda simple. And here are all these different agendas that pop up if you want to get, kind of crazy about your agenda. Now listen, here's an easy one right here. You want to keep it simple. This one's black and white. You can just, change out the times and things like that. Or you can simply use a Word document and just make your agenda just a plain old Word document with the times on there. But it does help. Let's go back to my agenda here. It does help to have a piece of paper in people's hands so that they can go down and look at the agenda. Notice here, I have what we're doing. It's the math team, the date, the time. Then I have our norms set. It helps to have the norms either in front of everybody or posted on the wall. Sometimes people will have a big poster of the norms, or they'll write the norms on a big, poster board or chart paper, and they'll have them set up in the room so that they're always there to say, hey, let's make sure we're adhering to our norms. Having them in front of people is really helpful. And I find having them on the agenda is really good because people are constantly staring down at the agenda, writing on their agenda, things like that. So I find having the norms at the top is really good. Notice that we only have 4 items on this agenda. Let's try not to pack the half an hour with 50 million things, right? Just 4 things that are really important that we're going to go over. I'll talk about that in a second. And then below that, I have a little place for notes. Some teachers are going to have their own notebooks, stuff like that. But a lot of teachers, they just came from the restroom, they're running in last minute, and having this little area where they can write notes and having this PLC agenda is very helpful. Notice it has the date on it. So like if this person just keeps her agendas or his agendas in a folder, that person can go back and look and see, oh yeah, here are my notes from that. It's very helpful. So I recommend having a little space for notes for your people there. Now, notice that I have the times very specific. If you are a public school teacher, you are used to very short meetings and agenda times that are very short. So you can see from 2:50 to 2:55, we recap last week's meeting. It's only 5 minutes. Then we move to 2:55 to 3:10, review data on common assessments. 3:10 to 3:15, discuss interventions and next steps. And 3:15 to 3:20, discuss next week and what will drive the agenda for next week. Okay, so very small increments. Notice that the biggest part there, the 15 minutes, is the review data on common assessments, and I'll talk about that. Now, remember I said PLCs are for action research, and you want to think of yourself as a researcher in your PLC. You are a teacher, of course, but you want to think of yourself as someone who is in the action, conducting research and making really important decisions. So what is action research? In a nutshell, action research is really you as a teacher collecting data in real time, grabbing that data, going into your PLC, talking about it with other researchers who happen to be teachers, discussing what's working, what's not working, how you're going to modify instruction and your pedagogy and practice, and then re-administering, collecting more data, coming back, discussing. So it's like there's a lot of action going on. You're in the action. A lot of scientists or researchers, they're in a lab, right? They collect the data and then they analyze it in a lab and they make predictions or generalizations and things like that. You're not in a lab. You're in a classroom in real time. And so that's what action research is. You're making decisions based on data in real time, and then you're coming back together as a group of researchers in the PLC to discuss that data and make decisions as a group. Now, one of the easiest ways to do this is to come up with some common assessments in your PLC that you give so that you can come back with common data to discuss. If I bring in my own test data and Ms. Jones brings in her own test data and Mr. Smith brings in his own test data and we're comparing, that really doesn't make sense, right? So some PLCs, and the PLCs that I worked with, we had our own common assessments. It wasn't everything. Not every assessment in your classroom has to be common, but they had monthly common assessments where they could collect similar data from similar age students from similar content areas. Remember, your sample size and your data sets and things like that need to be similar for reliability. And then we come together and look at that data and see what's going on. Maybe my data was not good. Like most of my kids got a 59 or a 60 or nothing more than a 70. But Mr. Jones's kids, they all got in the 80s and 90s. So I'm going to want to talk with Mr. Jones about what he did to teach that concept. It doesn't necessarily mean that Mr. Jones is a better teacher than I am, that I'm a loser. Teachers are very they protect their data, right? But this is really a place where you trust your colleagues, you exchange data, you talk about it. And I say, Mr. Jones, how did you do this? And he might say, well, I did a read aloud, think aloud. I really worked through this as a reading activity, and maybe I did it more as a cooperative learning activity, and maybe the kids weren't ready for that. Maybe the read aloud, think aloud was a little more explicit, and it helped them understand the concept. So we do that back and forth in this PLC and discuss, look at the data, and I say, I'm going to try that. All right, let me try that next time. Then I do that for the following common assessment, or maybe I reteach the concepts. That would be ideal. Reteach the concepts that my kids were not great on in that common assessment, then re-administer it and see if Mr. Jones's read aloud, think aloud worked. If it did, I know I'm onto something. And so that's how we really refine our practice. That's how we become better instructors, better researchers, and just better overall educators. So that's really helpful. Now, if you're an assistant principal, you really want to encourage your teachers to do this. And so we want to build a culture of respect, community, and collaboration, which is much harder than it sounds. So the first couple of PLCs may be duds. Teachers may not know what to do. They may not have, the experience in action research and things like that. You may have a lot of new teachers who just have no idea what's going on. And so you as the assistant principal are really going to need to nurture them. You may want to have a sample agenda for them, not something that they have to do, but you may say, hey, look, I have this sample agenda, modify it any way you want, but I know you may not know where to start. Here's a starting point for you. Here's a suggestion. When you're an assistant principal, one thing you want to be very careful of when it comes to PLCs, you do not want to insert yourself or assert yourself as the authoritative figure in the situation. PLCs are teacher communities. They are not answering to the administrator at the moment. It's about them getting together and working on their practice. In fact, I would not sit in on PLCs unless I was invited. I would go in and check, because we had to check to make sure everybody was participating. It was like one of those professional development points. But I would go in, I would check, I'd make sure everybody was okay. I would be of service. I would say, hey, do you guys need anything? Do you have any questions about anything? And if they did, fine. If they didn't, I would leave. And most often I would just make cupcakes and bake things for the PLCs so that teachers had something to eat. So I always had something like breads or cupcakes. I learned that from a former director who I worked with as we were doing professional development. She always brought in something baked or something cooked, and we all ate it and we loved it because we were starving. And anything, kind of sweet and warm when you are tired and burnt out is always really good. And it's hard for people to be rude with a cupcake in their mouth. So at least you get them going with their PLCs. So a little bit of advice for the administrators out there, make cupcakes for your teachers. It definitely helps. So now we have our agenda. We have what we're talking about. We know we're going to be reviewing our data and our common assessments. We're talking about it. And then we adjourn the meeting with, okay, what do we want to do for next week? All right. And it may be we want to do our next common assessment, or maybe we have some sort of writing project coming up. Maybe science fair is coming up. Now, remember, this is not a department meeting. This is an action research meeting. A department meeting is different. In a department meeting, you're talking about due dates and parent concerns and things like that. This is about research. So if the science fair is coming up, or maybe some math event or whatever, you want to make sure that we set some parameters for collecting data. So maybe there's something about the science fair we want our kids to do better with. So for example, maybe we want their research papers to be better. Maybe our kids last year focused too much on the project part and they didn't focus enough on the research report. So maybe we want to figure out ways in our PLCs to bolster that, collect some qualitative data, see what's working, and then, apply those interventions or apply those good practices throughout the science fair project. But remember, it's not a department meeting. It is about action research. So whatever you talk about for the next week needs to be focused on some sort of common data and common assessments so that you can, as a team, make instructional decisions and move your students towards achievement. Because remember, everything we do is about student achievement. All right, so that's part 1 of my PLC series. I will have part 2 out soon where I get more specific about the action research and how to do it. And if you have any questions, put them in the comments. If you're running your own PLCs right now and maybe you have some ideas you want to share, throw them in the comments. And please, if you have questions and you're like, I am lost, I don't know what's going on, let me know because it gives me ideas of what to talk about in my next video. So it helps me when you guys ask questions. And if you're an assistant principal and you're looking for tips about how to run PLCs, it's my favorite thing to do. Literally, my favorite thing to do as an assistant principal was running PLCs. So put your questions in the comments and I'll be happy to either film or answer them there. Also, this PLC agenda will be in the description below so you can download it just as a template. And remember, you can just use a Word document or you can go into Canva and make it fancy, whatever you want to do. Thank you so much for watching today. Please consider giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to my YouTube channel. I really appreciate your being here. Have an awesome day. Thank you so much for watching. We have a ton of videos on my YouTube channel. Please consider subscribing and following me on my social media networks at Kathleen Jasper. Have a great day.